the economy grows. Now remember what growth is. Remember what growth is. Growth is a change in GDP, the change in the capital stock, the change in the labour stock. So when you think of growth, okay, when you think about growth, think about it in the following way. You have 100 units of output at time t. You have 105 units of output at time t plus 1. Growth is therefore 5%. Okay? That minus that divided by that. 105 minus 100 divided by 100. Okay? So, and multiply by 100. So that'll give you a sense of what we mean by growth. So it can be growth in GDP, so GDP growth, percentage change, that triangle means change, GDP growth, or the percentage change in capital growth. So you can think about it, K dot over K. Okay, so K dot is the change in capital over time. That's just dk dt. If you had 100 factories last year and you have 120 this year, dk is 20. The change over time. Divided by K, which is the capital stock at the particular period. So this is the capital stock. When you're talking about capital stock, you always need to subtract away depreciation, which is minus delta K. Depreciation. Always need to subtract away depreciation. It's very important. And then you need to worry about population. You need to worry about population. One of the biggest and most interesting things about Ireland in the last 200 years has been the fluctuation of its population. Its population has increased and shrunk and increased again, and now it's due for another massive increase as more babies were born this year than any year since 1891. So these things you need to understand, and I showed you last week some stylized facts about growth, the share of wage growth, the share of capital growth. Growth is about the most important thing we can talk about. So we talked about 3 different models. You saw the Harrod-Domar model. Harrod-Domar. You saw the Solow model, and you saw the Kaldor model of growth. Each of them says growth is caused by something else. Finally, we need to look a little bit at Joan's banana. So Joan in this case is a lady called Joan Robinson. She was professor of economics at the University of Cambridge up until her death in the 1980s. She's considered one of the greatest economists never to have won the Nobel Prize in Economics. Incidentally, the Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded today to 2 men. Alvin Roth and Lloyd Shapley, for their design of mechanisms, in particular their design of how organs get allocated from donors to recipients around the world. So check out their Nobel citation soon. So Joan was considered one of the few women who were of Nobel quality who never got it. The first woman to win the Nobel Prize 2 years ago was Elinor Ostrom. Anyway, Joan said the following. She said the savings rate from profits, SR, okay, the savings rate from profits, SR, times the rate of profit, R, gives you the growth rate. That's what she's saying, okay? And it's really important to understand this. What she's saying is that there is, in some sense, a relationship between the capital stock growth rate, which is that red line there, and this rate of profit, which is given by the blue line, which gives you her banana, if you like, this banana function. Now the banana function has 2 equilibria. The first is at the bottom there, and the second is at the top. And what Robinson speculated was, she was a student of Keynes in the 1930s, what Robinson speculated was that animal spirits, or the boom and bust psychological nature of the market, in some sense determined where you were on this curve. The idea being that you are here, You're here when things are bad. For example, now everybody's going, oh, the economy's fucked, doom, 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 doom. And up here, we have things where everything's going grand. And basically what happens is the economy switches from here to here in a heartbeat. And we can see that that did indeed happen from 2007 to 2008. Basically, from Christmas 2007 to sort of June 2008, people went from thinking the Irish economy could do no wrong to thinking, oh my God, we're the worst economy in Europe. And so that collapses investment. So Jones banana, if you like, is a way to integrate psychology, the notion that we are all in some sense connected through our perception of how we think the world is going to be. If you think the Irish economy is going into the toilet, you're definitely not going to buy a house. If you think it's going to fly and you think everything's going to go well, sure, you may as well buy a house. Okay, Jones banana. The great economist Edward Nell has an idea called transformational growth. And his idea is that growth, not only does growth increase the size of the pie, it changes the pie itself. Yeah? So growth in effect transforms the economy. Yeah? Or one way to describe it even better is growth in societies changes the society. So earlier on this year, I asked the women in the audience how many children you'd like to have. And I think the answer came back somewhere like minus 0.75 children. I think that was roughly the answer that the ladies had. I just gave a lecture to the fourth years just there, and I asked them, they were in your shoes 2 years ago, and it had changed slightly. It went from sort of 10% to about 40%, which is interesting. Anyway, growth in societies changes societies. So, for example, one of the things we know about developing economies is once you allow women into education, and particularly into higher education, not just reading and writing, but into the sciences, engineering, the social sciences, degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, the birth rate falls. It changes the society. The birth rate falls, taxes go up because these people get jobs. Okay, so that's one way that it changes. Another way that growth changes the society is it allows the factors of production to be used in different ways. So people might have used a field in the past just to put cows on it, but now, because the society has changed, what they're actually going to do is use it for rapeseed production, or perhaps for bioengineering, or even for genetically engineered plants, things like this. Development transforms societies and economies. I think we would find, if we looked back, a completely different Ireland in 1970 as 2012. Really different. It's only 40 years. Yeah, only 40 years. It's really interesting. The length of the life of this university. It's really quite a remarkable period. Even when you go back, even to, let's say as close to the past as when I was a kid, many of the places I grew up in were fields, and now they're huge housing estates. So this idea of development transformation. I love this quote. I'm not going to read it all, but I really like it. He says, "What markets do is generate the pressures that increase productivity. These pressures bring about innovations, organizational innovations, as well as new technologies, which markets then diffuse through the system, making the diffusion possible. This means markets pick winners and losers, which is indeed a rough sort of allocation." Okay? A rough sort of allocation. Okay? So I find that quite interesting, that markets generate these pressures. So think about this quote in the context of the Croke Park Agreement. What's happened? The market has boomed, it has bust, it has destroyed the fiscal solvency of the nation. The government needs to get its finances under control. So what's happening? The market is generating a pressure to reduce wages in the public sector. That's exactly what's happening there. Market adjustment, the price mechanism, mobilizes profits to underwrite investment. So we're talking about shared services a lot, and things like this. So let me talk to you about distribution. Distribution is who has and who has not. There are lots of ways to measure income distribution. There are about 300 seats in this room, okay? And it looks like there's about, I don't know, 200 people here. So the thing, it looks to me to be about 2/3 full. Well, if we were to look at the income shares in terms of the seats, if the seats represented wealth, okay, in Ireland, there's about 200 people here, then about 190 of you would be in there, just from you back. You would all be there. About 190 of you would just go literally from the chap in the white t-shirt to the chap in the blue hoodie and back down there. That, all of you would be in there. And the remaining maybe 18, 20 people would have the rest of the seats. Okay? That's the income distribution in Ireland. In America, roughly 5 people would have almost all of the seats, and everyone else would have basically those 4 rows in terms of percentages. In America, there are people who earn almost 38,000 times the average wage in a year. The top 10 hedge fund brokers in America, how much do you think their average take-home pay was in 2009? The top 10. What was their average pay for the top 10? Yeah. Their individual pay, like these are people. They're not kind of corporations or whatever. The average pay for the top 10 hedge fund earners was 14 billion euros. The average for the top 10, 14 billion in 2009. Not million, billion. These are to individual. This is like, Steve, well done. Hedge fund, win, billion. Pretty good, eh? So, income distribution measures this. Who gets what? Now, we tend to use something called the Gini coefficient. And essentially the Gini coefficient measures income distribution. A Gini coefficient of 1, and everybody please write this down. When Gini is 1, that means perfect inequality. Okay? Gini is 1, that's perfect inequality. And if Gini is 0, that means it's perfect equality. Ireland at the moment has a Gini of 0.3 or so. So what's quite interesting about the Gini coefficient is that it looks a bit like this. Actually, so you can see this is the income share for Ireland for 2009. They tend to be quite slow coming out. Income percentile. So here are people. Here's a very small percentage. This is the first 20% of the population by income percentile. And you can see they have less than 8% of the total wealth. So these are the poorest, and they've got 8% of the wealth. Then 20 to 40%, these I suppose you'd call them the lower middle class, they have about 12% of the total wealth. The people who are in the 40 to 60 percentile, they have about 15% of the wealth. The people in the 60 to the 80 percentile have nearly 25% of the wealth. And the people in the 80th to the 100 percentile have nearly 44% of the wealth. That's in Ireland, not in the US. In the US, this bar is really, really, really high. It's one of the most unequal societies on the planet, actually. So, how do you calculate Gini and why does it matter? It matters because the Gini coefficient has changed over time. Okay? So here's one way to think about it. Well, no, sorry. The Gini value is the excess share the rich person has in a 2-person distribution. So think about it like this. The excess share of the rich person in an n person distribution. Let's take an example. Here are 10 people. Okay? Here are 10 people. And the first 9 have 8%. The first 9 have 8% of the wealth. And the top guy here has 28%. Okay? So if you average out the difference between the guy who has 28% and everybody else, you find the Gini is 45%. Similarly, if you give the same guy 72% of the wealth and give everybody else 2%, Gini is 0.62. Okay? And what we can see, you could think about this in another way. Here are different ways of thinking about Gini. Here, oh, now what? Here, Gini is 30%. Okay? If you have an 80-20 distribution of income, which is something called the Pareto distribution, here, Gini would be like 30%. If you have a situation here, this is where Gini is something like 45%. So you can see there are different income slices. Here's one of the most equal societies in the world, Finland. They have very good income inequality, They have very low income inequality. They've got an extremely good social welfare system. Everybody pays a lot of tax, but they get a lot back from their society. They have the best education system in the world. They're one of the best health systems in the world. There aren't that many utterly wealthy people, but there are very, very few poor people as well. Pretty nice place to live if you can handle the cold. It's dark in winter there 22 hours of the day. So if you think we're grim and glum, you know, you can see that. Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is one of the most unequal places on planet Earth. In Zimbabwe, you have people who can't afford shoes and people who have Lamborghinis. And they drive one beside the other. It's a really, really, really unequal place. It's so unequal, the Gini can't really account for the changes over time. Ireland has changed massively in terms of income inequality from 1999 to 2004. And you can see it here. So this line here is the line of perfect equality. Okay, so this is 99, the line of perfect equality. And what this curve is telling you is how different each decile has it from the other. So if this was a perfectly straight line, then the bottom 10% would have 10% of the wealth, and the next 20% would have 10% of the wealth, and so forth. But that's not the case. What happens is these guys here have very, very low amounts of the wealth, and these guys up here have a huge proportion. And the income inequality, in a sense, is adding up all the differences underneath this curve. And what you can see here, actually, is that the income deciles have gotten. Can you see that it's gotten a bit fatter here? Can you see that it's gotten a bit fatter here? So what's happened is these guys are just as poor. In 2004, these guys are just as poor. These guys are almost as rich, but these guys in the middle are much richer. So the middle classes, the poor have stayed poor, but the middle classes have gotten richer. So the gap between them has gotten bigger. Does that make sense? Yeah? Even though they're both advancing in terms of their living standards, the middle classes are pulling away from the rest of them. So there is no established theory of growth and development. Innovation, by the way, if anything, is slowing down. There's a brilliant paper by Robert Hall released quite recently, which essentially said innovation is slowing down. His argument was the following: which would you rather? All of the innovations pre-1990 or all of the innovations after 1990? Would you be willing to give up sanitation and hygiene in exchange for Facebook and Twitter? Obviously, all of you, well, maybe not me, but most of you would be like, no, I'd rather, a shower. No, actually, maybe not. Maybe some of you would like that. But no, the truth about it is innovation does seem to be slowing down. Distribution shows inequality is very important, and it's not the case that growth solves inequality. Growth may actually lead to more inequality. The economy can grow if you just hand all the money to one person and they invest it all and get rich. The economy will grow. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's better off. Okay? So now we're moving on to the open market. There's no point in talking about closed market economies at all. There are key readings for this lecture. Mishkin, The Economics of Money and Banking. It's in the library. Chapter 24 of Ledden and Walsh. Chapter 18 of Ledden and Walsh. Or the Mankiw and Taylor book that you had before. All right. What do we want to do? I want to extend the ISLM that you learned for imports and exports. I want to show you the effect of a shock on a small open economy. I want to relate this thing to Ireland's recent experience. Well, you live in a funny time. You live in a funny time when the basic macroeconomic rule book is being ripped up. Prior to 2008, this was the following dominant paradigm. Robert Lucas, who won the Nobel Prize in 1995 and proclaimed in 2003 that macroeconomics had solved all the major problems of economics. Ouch, for getting that one wrong. A bit like the guy who said Ireland's going to have a soft landing in its property market. He said, well, here's what you need. Overlapping generations, the notion that there are young people at any particular point in time, young people and old people. And as the old people die, the young people become old and they have kids and those people become young and so forth. And there are overlapping generations. There are young people and then there are old people. Now you are young, soon you will be old. And you have to make a decision. How much of your consumption and investment and saving and living effectively do you do when you're young and when you're old? That's the big question for a lot of you, actually. And clearly we don't really think about this thing too well, or too clearly. The natural rate. This idea is that there are only so many jobs. Even in a low inflation economy with a lot of demand, not everybody is going to have a job, so there's a natural rate of unemployment. Rational expectations, the idea that in some sense you think about the future the way you think about the past and you learn from that. The island paradigm. You are islands. Every single one of you is an island. Literally. You have contact with other people and other things, but when it comes to the economy, you're on your own. Okay? You have to make your own living in life. You have to do your own saving, your own consumption. You're an individual. You may even be a household, but realistically speaking, we would assume that you're an individual. Search theory, the notion that you look for work up until the point that you find it, and then you stop. But even when you have the work, you keep looking, which is very interesting. Human capital, the notion that you, through your education, through your training, your work-related activities, and basically your life, you become better at what you do. And finally, the fundamental welfare theorems, which you studied last year, essentially saying that in a perfectly competitive market, where prices adjust smoothly, the economy reaches its Pareto optimum, where everybody is its happiest. That's macroeconomics today, or at least it was until 2008. Problem with this beautiful synthesis was that it was a beautiful theory, and it was killed off by a load of ugly, smelly, disgusting, buried facts. We've totally forgotten Hicks and Keynes. John Robert Hicks was a Nobel laureate who essentially taught the world Keynesian economics through his 1937 article, Mr. Keynes and the Classics. And they have been erased from history for 40 years. You must understand that economics evolves according to crises. Basically what happens is we think we know everything. Then a crisis comes along and smashes the theory. And then we rebuild the theory. That's what we do. And so if you look back at, let's say, the 20-year deflation in the 1890s, that's where the rocking horse theory came from, the equilibrium theory that you learned last year. The German hyperinflation gave us the theory of the interest rate in the 1940s. The Great Depression gave us Keynesian economics. The golden era of economic growth gave us growth theory, which you saw last week. Of what gives us growth? What gives us growth? The stagflation of the 70s basically gave us the Phillips curve. And I showed you the video of the Phillips curve and the money act moving and interacting over time. And now we're up to the almost the present day, in the 1980s, open economy macroeconomics, the Lucasian synthesis, which I just showed you there, and now a bit of open economy stuff as well. And finally, the collapse of what's called real business cycle theory in post-2008. I have no idea what comes next. Probably some of you will come up with the answer. Maybe one of you has the answer to the next chapter in economic theory. I don't know. I have no idea what the answer is. The only thing I know is I have to keep teaching you the fact that I don't know. So if one of you would please come up with the answer, that'd be awesome. So then I could put something there and just go, yeah, the answer is blah. I haven't come up with it myself. I'm not going to lie, I've had a go. But you have to come up with it because no one else seems to be able to. Okay. Let us say we are in this world where price adjustments clear markets. Okay? Price adjustments clear the market. All booms and busts are cyclical phenomena. Okay? There are laissez-faire policies, so we allow the market to adjust. And this is basically free market economics. And so what we end up doing is living in this world. This nice world where we have real GNP on this axis, the price level on this axis, aggregate demand here, and short-run aggregate supply here. Aggregate demand is about consumption, investment, government expenditure. Aggregate supply here is about the factors of production, effectively the production function. Y is a function of K and L. And what this line here, the long-run aggregate supply, is telling you is this is what happens when the factors of production are all mutable, when they can move around and you can move factories and labour and all the rest of it. It's very nice. But what happens if the price level is too high? What happens if the price level is too high? Okay? If the price level is too high. Then you end up in really, really deep trouble. Actually. There's no way really to move it forward, to be honest. In this situation, you have to push up aggregate demand up to the nth degree. But let me give you an example of this, just to stop you all from nodding off. What's the minimum wage in Ireland? $8.65. Hands up here who would like, who thinks the minimum wage is too high? Hands up here who thinks it's too high. Who would let it drop? Or who would repeal the minimum wage altogether? Just let people contract for what they want. So if you're worth a tenner an hour, that you get a tenner an hour. And if you're willing to work for a $5 an hour, you'll work for a $5 an hour. How many of you would be up for that? Letting the market do its thing. The employer is going to say, look, I'd love to hire a guy at €5 an hour. Love it. I'd love to hire a guy at €5 an hour. But I can't. Too expensive. $8.65 plus pensions plus everything else. No, I can't afford it. So how many of you think that the minimum wage is too high? Or there should be no minimum wage? Okay. How many of you think it's a great idea? How many of you have no opinion whatsoever? If you have no opinion, don't raise your hand. Yeah. Here's the issue with the minimum wage. This is number of workers, L. This is the wage, W. This is labour demand. This is the labour supply. Here is the equilibrium wage. L star. So this is like 95% unemployment. This is W star. Okay? That's Ireland in 2007. The minimum wage is down here. Okay? Let's just call it €9 an hour just for the minimum wage. Now what happens when labour demand collapses? What happens when it comes back here? What happens when it comes back here? This is like the only stick of chalk in this entire lecture theatre as well, so whoever comes after me is going to be like, ugh. Okay, when labour demand collapses to here, the equilibrium wage is here. Right? So maybe the equilibrium wage is like €7 an hour. But that's illegal. That's illegal. It's illegal to charge less or for your labour than $8.65 an hour. If you're over 18. It's illegal. Yeah. And any employer that it has you working for less is doing something illegal. Now maybe you'd be happy enough to work for €8 an hour, or like 7 or something. Maybe you wouldn't be too happy to work for 2. Case of the poor chap in Dublin who was brought over by his cousin. Yeah, do you remember that? He was brought over by his cousin on a 1-year work visa, And then the cousin basically locked him in the house for 9 years and made him cook in his restaurant. And then he successfully sued him for damages and all that. And then they wouldn't give it to him because he was an illegal immigrant for 8 of the 9 years because your man had taken his passport off him, which I thought was an unduly harsh response. But anyway, here is kind of serfdom. Here it makes sense. But I guess my point here is that here's L star, here's L1, here's L2. Okay? The minimum wage, by this analysis, is actually reducing employment. It's not increasing it. So this textbook that I'm showing you up here, it's assuming price movements are allowed to go as low as they need to, or as high as they need to. So if you need to pay a guy €100 an hour to get your job done, okay, that's fine, the market will allow that. But if you need to pay a guy €2 an hour to get the job done, that's not okay. Now what are the arguments against this? Many of you will be on the minimum wage. Hopefully not after you finish your degrees, but like over the summer or whatever, if you're doing jobs like that, you'll be fine. Why would you do this? Why? What effect would there be of you just saying, "Oh well, we don't really need the minimum wage anymore. Work for whatever." Well, you'd end up with people on much lower wages. You'd effectively transfer the surplus that the employee was producing and consuming to the employer. You'd effectively transfer wealth to the employer. Okay? You'd also end up hammering people's living standards. So prices, and this is the important point about this little illustration, prices do not adjust smoothly. They don't adjust smoothly like we assume in Say's world, according to Say's law. Okay? Prices don't adjust smoothly. Sometimes the price level is up there above 120 with excess aggregate demand, which produces a huge explosion in prices and commodities. You have an inflation. Sometimes it's down here, it's too low. Okay? Would everybody please take this down? So, this is the ISLM model. What the ISLM model does is relate the goods market to the financial market. So it relates, the I stands for investment, S stands for saving. So think about it as the goods market. Investment is saving. LM stands for loans and money. Loans and money. Okay? So you can think about this as the real economy, the IS curve, and this is the financial economy. And effectively, what the IS curve does is it shows you equilibrium in the goods markets. So when you have aggregate supply and aggregate demand, AD is AS, P, and P. This is PNP, the interest rate R. At this point here, this gives you a point on the IS curve. And when aggregate demand goes down to here, this gives you another point on the IS curve. And when it's up here, gives you another point. It looks like that. Okay. Similarly, the LM model comes from the demand for loanable funds. The idea that you have a certain amount of cash at any particular point in time. So this here will be the interest rate, or this will be the supply of loanable funds. Loanable funds. And this again looks like this. Okay? Sorry. Like this. So for a higher interest rate, you're willing to learn more. Okay? Which gives you this. Okay. So this is the real economy, if you like. This thing here, the financial. Oh, sorry, there's the money supply there. Drop that. Money supply and there's loanable funds. So this gives you this nice equilibrium where we can relate. Sorry, this isn't just an equilibrium. I misspoke. This is a general equilibrium. Would everyone please write that down? It's quite important. This is a general equilibrium. So it's an equilibrium across the entire economy, not just across the goods market. It's a general equilibrium. The IS is a goods market equilibrium. The LM is a money market equilibrium. Okay. Now, Hicks said there's a typical classical theory. That's what he said. He said there's a given capital stock, labour, and capital. And essentially what he said was output is a function of employment. Okay? There's diminishing marginal productivity. And prices equal marginal costs. So there's this nice thing that says, okay, marginal cost equals the marginal product of labour. No problem. And marginal cost is given by the increase in labour input for each increment in output. So you get this nice price system here. Px, right? The price of some good X is the wage times the amount of it you produce. It makes loads of sense. I really like this because it's nice and grounded in reality. Similarly, for the other good, Y. Income, whatever, please write this down. National income is the value of output. National income is the value of output, which is just price times quantity. So if the economy produces apples and it produces 100 apples, and each apple is €2, GDP is 200. Yeah? That's the idea. The value of output. So you know that there are three ways to measure GDP. Income, output, and expenditure. That's what this is looking at. Income is the value of output, which is the price times the quantity. So, there's some amount of money, M, which is a given and fixed relation between M and some income I. Alright? So I really like this. I really like this idea. The idea is that money is quote-unquote a veil over barter. So it's just a way for you to exchange barter mechanisms. So rather than exchanging 2 apples for a bowl of porridge, you go 2 apples for a bowl of porridge, you go I'll have 50 cents please, something like that. You just exchange it. So there's M, money, is K times I, this constant velocity of money. The velocity of money is a lovely concept. I've explained it in class before, but it's a lovely concept and it works like this. There's a certain amount of cash in the system. It goes forth from the central bank. You spend it and eventually the business lodges it back into the bank and the bank sees the same note again. If you look at the notes that are in your pocket, each one of them has a serial number. T550838058881. They scan these and they see this note again. When they see that, make a full circle, they know that the velocity of this thing is 1. And if they see the same note coming back again and again and again, that's when they know the velocity is increasing or decreasing. Okay, so the demand for investment goods is a function of the interest rate. So if the interest rate is higher, people will invest more. This is obvious, okay? You will invest some certain amount. Your supply of savings, you'll invest your savings if there's a high interest rate. Are there high interest rates at the moment? No, they're knocked down. They're really, really cheap. In fact, interest rates are almost, or rather bonds are almost exactly the same as cash, which is a huge problem we'll talk about probably on Friday. So I is a function of savings. Higher savings means higher investment. And so you get this. Demand and supply of goods, which is this diagram here. Okay? Demand and supply of goods. And this amount here determines the amount of output actually produced. Right there. So, let me finish this and then we'll go. If you understand this, folks, if you understand what follows next in the next minute, you'd understand the rest of this model. So just bear with me. The amount of money determines the investment level, which is total output. The interest rate determines the amount of investment. The investment determines the amount of output for a given wage. And the difference between the two determines the output of consumption. Okay? The consumption good determines the amount of production of that good. And that means, crucially, for a lower money wage, you'll get higher employment, which brings me back to the minimum wage. A lower money wage means higher employment. Yeah? Lower wages mean lower prices. And finally, unchanged money means higher income relative to prices, so higher sales. So, if you believe this version of the world, if you believe it looks like this, why wouldn't you simply cut the minimum wage and harm tens of thousands of people in the result? Okay, think about that and how you'll all turn into monsters if you believe economic theory. Have a nice